Somewhere Better by I_am_Ellie on AO3. Episode 65, Chapter 15, Learning to Breathe. Izuku, Denki, Hitoshi, Hitoshi's dad, and a handful of other students from another homeroom class were the only ones outside of the ship when everything started going wrong. The man had short blonde hair that stood up in tufts, and his arms looked like they were wrapped in ribbing red, glistening cords. He had an evil grin, and he was wearing a tight black tank top that looked like it would shred off from his shoulders at any point. He looked like the picture-perfect form of a villain, and Izuku had a feeling he knew who this man was. I should have stayed at school, Izuku thought faintly, and then he wanted to cry at the unfairness of it all. Two adults leaped from nowhere to meet the villain, and he cracked, grinning a sharp-like grin that showed far too many teeth. He, Hitoshi, and Denki turned to Mr. Shinsou as one, each of them with a fearful expression on their faces. Hitoshi was already crying, tears welling up in his eyes and bottom lip wobbling dangerously, and Izuku thought he was on his way of doing the same. Mr. Shinsou, Denki gasped, hands shaking and eyes wide as saucers. Mr. Shinsou, what do we... There was a loud crackling sound, and the wood under their feet began splintering and breaking apart. Chunks of plywood floating away on the waves. The other children screamed. Hitoshi grabbed onto Mr. Shinsou's leg, and Denki let out a choking, sounding sob. Izuku couldn't move. Okay, boys, Mr. Shinsou finally said, sounding far calmer than he should. Far calmer than Izuku felt. We're gonna get to the big ship, okay? It's gonna be okay. Let's get on the ship now, huh? We'll be safe on the ship, I promise. Mr. Shinsou picked up Hitoshi, bracing him on his hip, as he marched towards the ship, Izuku finally hurrying behind him. When he looked behind himself, Denki was still stuck in the same place, sobbing and shaking as he wiped at his eyes. Denki! Izuku called, running back and grabbing his friend's hand as the dock continued to shake. The water hose duo was fighting the villain, glaring at him with a single-minded determination. But Izuku knew if they didn't move right then, they weren't gonna make it. Thanks! Come on! It's okay! Zuku! I'm scared! I don't... don't... Denki sobbed again, covering his face and whimpering. I don't want to be here. I want my brother and my mama. Izuku grabbed his hand and pulled him along to the boat, Denki still crying loudly as they went along. It's okay. Come on. We just gotta get on the boat and we could go home. It's okay. The villain punched the dock again, and Izuku saw what area was going to collapse in on itself a moment before it did. Denki screamed, and Izuku dove, pushing Denki away from himself with all his might. Mr. Shinsou grabbed Denki, pulling him aside, and Izuku was in the water. The freezing, iron-gray water. Water went in his eyes, burning like fire, and his nose and down his throat, burning its way down and causing him to spit and cough and sob. The water sunk him down, and the current pulled him away, hands scrabbling for purchase that wasn't there, trying desperately to grab a hold of a chunk of wood so he could stay afloat. His lungs were burning. His head felt like it was going to explode if he held his breath any longer. He had been kicking his feet, trying to get to the surface, but even that was becoming difficult, exhausting. So Izuku stopped. He took a deep, stinging breath, and for a moment, just a moment, the pain in his head was gone. His chest was heavy now, like the moment before he fell asleep at night, and taking a nap seemed like a good idea. He was so sleepy. The water was warmer when he fell asleep. The freezing cold, melted iron was gone, and now it felt like bath water, or a thick blanket, comfortably hot. His eyes closed. The darkness behind his eyelids got darker. The sounds of screaming and lapping waves and destruction faded away entirely. And there was nothing. When he saw the child in the water, he was sure they were dead. and he had been half tempted to leave them, gather the rest of the children onto the giant metal vessel where they were most likely to be safe, so he could help out with Muscular in any way he could. Then he saw the two children gathered at the splintered edge of the dock, and all habilitations left him as he dove into the water. He hadn't known the child in the water was Izuku at first, and that made him feel unbelievably ignorant. All he knew was that there was a small body submerged in the water, just under the surface, not moving, and that the rescue team from another agency was still several miles out. But then, he finally got a hold of the child, and he saw the freckles, the chubby face, and the shock of green hair. That was when the panic set in, when he remembered that earlier thought of the child being dead and the fact that there was no way he was strong enough swimmer to make it to the dock. The child was stiff and cold. He didn't breathe. His skin was pale, and his freckles were gray. His lips were blue, dark blue, and his hair hung from his head in a wet, dark green curtain, and he was so small. When Shinsou jumped into the water and grabbed Izuku, he almost fought him. Almost. It would have been a close thing, honestly, had he not remembered that Izuku getting any help, especially the help of a doctor, was important. A moment after Shinsou swam away, there was a large splash right next to him, then strong arms hauling him out of the water, and Shouta had never felt like less of a hero. There was blood in his mouth, blood and salt water, and Shouta had no idea where the blood had come from, but there it was, coating his lips and his teeth, burning like acid on his tongue, and he choked and spat it out over the side of the dock, coughing and hacking. Denki and Hitoshi were at Izuku's sides, as Shinsou performed CPR. The blonde child, Denki, cried and teared at his hair and face, looking utterly terrified. Then there was Hitoshi, drawn, pale, and unmoving, staring at Izuku with eyes unblinking, like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Shouta could share the sentiment. Shouta couldn't do anything but stare, as Shinsou did chest compressions, tried his best to save the boy's life. All Shouta could do was stare and try to remember to breathe. He thought his shoulders might be shaking, trembling uncontrollably, as a cold feet settled in his gut, like a chunk of ice. He thought someone might be yelling in his ear, but it felt like white noise. Then a hand grabbed his face, turned it to the side, and there was Tensei, yelling something that just added to all the gambled mess. His helmet was off. He looked kind of stupid, standing in his uniform without his helmet. Shouta felt like laughing. No, get your shit together. Breathe. I can't. Fucking breathe. My boy. That's my boy. That's Izuku. He pointed at the child who still wasn't breathing, and Tensei's face fell. He knows the child is dead too. No. He stood up, shuddering as he collapsed to his knees at Izuku's side. Shinsou only glanced at him for a moment before refocusing on the task at hand. Don't you dare. Don't you dare let him die. Words fail. He was so tired. Denki was still sobbing, head now tucked between his knees, hands covering his neck. And Shouta thought that was smart. Good for avoiding flying rubble. The child was smart. Certainly, smarter than his parents seemed to think he was. A chunk of metal flew right past Hitoshi's ear, and Shouta knew what he had to do. He looked away from Izuku, took a deep breath, and grabbed Hitoshi by the forearm, gesturing for Tensei. Ingenium. He was Ingenium, not Tensei, because he was Eraserhead, not Shouta. To grab Denki. He did, holding the boy to his chest, and rubbing a hand up and down the child's back. They had to get the children into the vessel until it was safe to move everyone. That was their best bet. Izuku. The other child couldn't be moved while he was being given CPR, but these children would have to be taken to a safer area. When they got the children on the ship, Ingenium grabbed his arm, holding him back. I think you should stay on the ship too, he stated, with a worrying frown. No. Eraser. I'm going to see where I'm needed. The dock was almost destroyed, everything in shambles as the battle raged on. Shinsou was still with the child, Shouta knew, and the villain Muscular was still quite far away, Well-placed bullets were flying. Bullets that truly didn't do anything to slow the villain down. There was blood in the water. Blood and bodies, so mangled they weren't even recognizable anymore. There were bodies on the remains of the dock as well, but only 2. Shouta had never met them, but he would be a fool not to recognize them. The water hose duo. They were related to Magne. Shouta knew that they had a child, and for a moment, he wondered what would happen to him. It was obvious they were a lost cause, but Shouta checked for their pulses anyways. Their skin was already icy cold, and they didn't have a heartbeat. There wasn't a pulse fluttering underneath the fingertips when he pressed a hand to their necks. There was only slick, drying blood and freezing skin. He took a deep breath and tried not to throw up. He wasn't sure how he'd be after the mission, but he knew that he had to be okay at the moment, even if the mission was a massacre. There was a loud, vibrating shriek that Shouta knew all too well, and he saw Hizashi drop into a roll, just as Muscular made a move to swipe at him with a large arm. Alright. What did he know about this man's quirk? Probably shock absorption. He could strengthen the muscle on his bodies, make them grow like crazy. And he was freakishly strong. There were slashes at the bulge of the muscle with knives, and they snapped and strung up like cut guitar chords, but they just regrew themselves every time they were cut. Like Hydra's heads. Shouta couldn't stop the sick grin from spreading on his face. It was a good thing they had someone who could cancel out quirks. He better situated his goggles on his face, and his eyes became red as he stared at the villain, watching in an off-handed fascination as the red-like muscles seemed to melt back into the man's body. His nephew might be dead. Don't think. And it was this man's fault. With that thought in mind, he leapt up and, while the villain was still dazed, kicked Muscular in the jaw. Muscular was a tough villain to beat, but without the added strength and fear that came from his quirk, his fighting style was severely lacking. Too much depended on raw power and strength, and not enough time spent refining it. That seemed to be the fate of quite a few heroes and villains, and why so many burnt out while they were young. In this case, Muscular's stupidity was why he, with the help of the other heroes, because the man was strong even without his quirk, was able to take down the villain. Hizashi shrieked at the villain, causing him to go into a stumbling daze, and Shouta looped his capture weapon around the villain's leg and pulled hard. The man went down easily, face first, making the dock tremble and shake at the impact. Shouta kept his quirk activated, even as his eyes began to sting, until someone with quirk suppression cuffs walked forwards to restrain the villain. When he finally deactivated his erasure, his legs were shaking so badly he thought he might fall. "Eraser, you alright?" Hizashi asked, grabbing his arm. Shouta nodded, even though alright felt like the furthest thing from the truth. He looked at Hizashi, and he saw relief shining in his eyes. Relief, adrenaline, and excitement, like he couldn't believe what had just happened. Shouta couldn't quite believe it either. Izuku came on the field trip, he stated, numbness setting in as the adrenaline faded away. This was Izuku's field trip. Izuku was here. Izuku wasn't on the ship. I don't. Hisashi's eyes widened, going red and glossy, and Shouta felt his own eyes fill with tears as well, even though he didn't feel like crying. Just take this, please. Deal with this. Please don't make me do this by myself. Telling someone else made him feel a little less numb. Shouta, where is he? Hizashi asked urgently. He's with Hitoshi's father. On the edge of the dock, he wasn't breathing, I think. Hizashi ran towards the edge of the dock, and Shouta followed, feeling a bit dazed. Shouta was sitting on the edge of the dock, head in his hands, and shirt rumpled and covered in dirt. Izuku was nowhere to be seen. Not on the dock, not off the dock, on the pavement, and not in the water. Where is he? Hizashi demanded, and Shinsou looked up at him with a tired expression. While Shouta and you were dealing with Muscular, paramedics gathered all the bodies from the dock, and some of the bodies in the water. Shinsou stated, and Shouta felt his heart sink. He was down for a good minute in the water, and when you pulled him out, he wasn't breathing, and he didn't have a pulse that I could hear, though that might have been because of the obvious signs of hypothermia. What are you saying? What are you saying? Hizashi had his hands tucked behind his head, and his shoulders were trembling, chest heaving. Shinsou took a deep breath. Shouta felt like being sick. With cardiac arrest, or drownings, it's essential to start CPR within 2 minutes to regain blood flow to the brain. After 3 minutes, brain damage is very, very likely. But even then, with CPR, doing it for too long can have nasty effects on the brain as well. It's tricky. When the paramedics came for Izuku, I had to manage to get him breathing again, but his ribs were broken from the chest compressions, and we don't know what the long-term effects for him will be, or what his quality of life will be until he wakes up. If he wakes up. Shouta rasped. Shinsou nodded. If he wakes up. But he's getting medical care. That's what's important now. Now, where is my little boy and Denki? We got them on the ship. They're fine. Shouta said, wiping at his eyes with the sleeve of his soaked uniform. Well, I think they're... Thank you. Shinsou marched off towards the ship, disappearing onto the vessel, and Shouta watched as heroes began to guide civilians and children off the dock and onto solid ground. Shouta didn't move. He sat on the edge of the dock, and a moment later, Hizashi sat down beside him. Why can't this kid catch a break? Hizashi asked, after a long moment of silence. Shouta wasn't sure how to answer that. As a writer, I should have remembered that death is not the worst thing one can do to a character. And I should have also remembered, just because major character death is not listed, does not mean death does not occur, because there's multiple types of death in characters. And in humans as well, but there's obviously, heart stopping. Technically speaking, Izuku did die for a couple minutes until he was brought back. That's what cardiac failure is. Then there's obviously brain dead, right? When the brain itself has lacked so much oxygen that it's, practically just, there's long-term effects and stuff. And obviously there's comas. Comas are also considered a type of death, especially when the doctors really truly believe that this person's never gonna wake up, kind of thing. And then there's the metaphorical death of this character is no longer who you think they are because they've died, their old past has died, like some Taylor Swift bullshit, I don't mean bullshit. I'm not crying, you're crying. I'm not crying. You're crying because I forgot. Death is not the worst thing an author can do to their characters. No! It is far from the worst thing. In fact, sometimes it's the merciful thing. For all we know, Izuku could have long-lasting, things. Drama. Drama's one. God. Freaking damn it! Oh, okay. I'm crying. Hold up. Breathe. 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 I can't breathe. I actually can't breathe. I'm sobbing. And I'm not sobbing, but I know that the second I get out of this recording and I press stop and I go down to sit down, I'm gonna start crying. And I know that this is not what's gonna fully make me break down and sob. I think what's gonna fully make me break down and sob is probably the next chapter, which is called Stiff. Also, we have 7 chapters left, and I'm scared that we're gonna leave it off at a really, really bad ending where Izuku doesn't wake up, and I'm gonna be super upset of that. What do you want, Echo Bro? Okay. Are you okay?
Your cat?
No!
Womp womp.
Oh my fucking fucking god. As always, my raindrops, make sure to eat,
Suffer.
sleep, drink water, don't suffer. Eat, sleep, my light! Eat, sleep, drink water, take your meds. Have a wonderful day or night. Link to my Discord server and socials are down in the description. Subscribe to see more of my content, and thank you so much for watching.